Hey everybody, Mr. Duker back again, and today talking about the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution is pretty important. We like to say it's kind of the beginning of the modern United States. If you could go back in time to this period, it's basically between the end of the Civil War and the beginning of World War I, the United States would not look much different than it does today. You got a lot of people moving to live in cities away from rural areas, a lot of people going to work in big factories or, clocking in and working shifts. A lot of the companies that we like to use today, like Coca-Cola and Levi's jeans, come from this time. A lot of modern technologies that we use every day also come from this time period. So it very much is kind of the beginning of kind of modern America. Kind of a big deal. So, like I said, Industrial Revolution begins after the end of the Civil War. The Civil War thought a lot of new technologies come about to try and, help win the war. But now that that is over, a lot of those technologies are now going to be applied to kind of regular everyday life. And these technologies have a big impact on America and people's lives and how people travel and communicate, wide-ranging effects. But they really do kind of transform the country. The country's changed by this technology. Lots of new inventions come from this time period. Steam engines, Bessemer process we'll talk about, railroads, electricity, light bulbs, phonograph, oil, gasoline, even airplanes are coming around eventually. All these, technologies come from this time period, and they're all very, very important and still used today. The Bessemer process in particular, we like to talk about in history classes because it's directly related to steel. And the Industrial Revolution was built on steel. Without steel, a lot of these things would not be happening. Basically, it's just a cheaper, quicker way to make steel. Iron, which is what people used before Civil War and before that. Iron is, they've been using iron since the Roman times, right? Iron is strong. But not that strong. There was actually a limit on how big you could build buildings before this time. Any building over 3 or 4 stories tall, the iron beams couldn't support the weight, and those buildings would actually collapse on themselves. Bridges could only be made so big because after a while the iron in the bridge couldn't support the weight and the bridges would collapse. Steel, though, is many times stronger, and now with steel, you could make buildings, skyscrapers. You could get, bridge any river, any river with any size bridge, because steel is so much stronger. But steel was expensive to make, and so it was very rare. People only use steel for things like knives and kitchenware and maybe tools. To have enough steel to build a building would be crazy talk until Bessemer process. Basically what it does is you melt iron down, and iron, if you look at it under a microscope, is kind of dirty. It's a dirty mineral. There's a lot of impurities in there. And steel is basically kind of purified iron. Those impurities are removed with a little bit of carbon added, but getting the impurities out is difficult. Bessemer process takes a lot of hot air, blows that through the molten iron. The impurities are lighter than the steel, so they are blown out. You get left with the pure iron alloy after, and then you just mix in a little bit of carbon and you get steel. So it's quick, it's cheap, it's easier than before, and now with steel, like I said, you can make huge bridges, skyscrapers, armor for battleships, huge ship, lots of things come from Bessemer process and steel. Railroad track with steel could be made to be a lot more durable, carry a lot more weight. You could build more railroads quickly, so that's helpful. Electricity is what we use to turn on light bulbs, right? So that was a big invention at the time. Before, everything was lit by candle. Work stopped at night because that's when the sun went down. Now electricity, light bulbs, factories and homes can be open and be productive all hours of the day. The phonograph, which is what that picture in the middle is like a very early record player. Records weren't put on discs yet. They're actually put on drums. And this is basically like a glorified music box, right? This one is hand powered. You got to turn the handle. There's a little needle, and it goes over like little ridges in the little drum. and that plays music, just like, again, a music box, a kid's music box does when you turn that crank on that. Oil, again, is used for gasoline and to power things like engines and factories. Very, very important. Now, one last box I put here, and I didn't mention it, but this is another invention, comes from the time period. We still use it today. You probably used it many times today. Do you have any guess what that little box picture is? Not a battery, not a speaker, not a pencil sharpener, though I've heard students say that before. It's actually the world's first Kodak camera, a portable camera, right? So now you can take that little box and you can go and do things you never could before, like take birthday photos, vacation photos, holiday photos, graduation photos, and you can take kind of home photographs now to preserve memories. Before, cameras, of course, were really heavy and expensive. It took a lot of time to make a photograph, but this Kodak portable home camera is light, quick, easy to use, and you can get your own pictures developed pretty easily. So there you go. World's first portable camera right there. To protect these inventions, because inventions was big money, patents were issued at the time. It's a protection of your invention so other people can't use or steal it. Still have patents today. More patents are being filed today than ever before. But basically it means that you own the idea. Now, you don't even have to make the invention. The patent just protects the idea. And so tons of patents are being made at this time. You can sell a patent so someone else can use your idea if you want to, and lots of, basically making money off of inventions. New technologies were important because this really fueled the economy. It fueled the growth of the country by being able to travel quicker and communicate faster and make products quicker. Everything's faster, bigger, stronger, better at this time. It kind of has a circular effect, right? For example, say you have a shoe factory business, right? That Coco movie, right? Remember Coco's family? They make shoes at home, right? But now, because of the Industrial Revolution, they can make shoes in factories now. This is brand new. You can make way more shoes than you ever could. But again, before all this, you would really only sell shoes to people in your village or maybe in your town. You don't need to make a bunch of shoes. There's only so many people that live next to you. But now you could take these record number of shoes you're making, probably on a new machine that makes them, right? You can put them on a train and sell these shoes to people in cities all across the country. Because you're selling so many shoes, you're making record profits, you're making tons of money, which allows you to expand your factory, build new machines, hire more workers to make even more shoes than before, a record number of shoes, to put on trains and sell to even more customers to make even more money than before. So it kind of feeds into itself in this cycle of always making more money, making more products, selling to more customers. We get the rise of these really big companies, like I said, companies that are still around today, but this is how they did it, using new technologies. Business is becoming very powerful, profitable, and rich during this time. And one reason they're able to, of course, technologies and more customers and more profits. But another big reason is the government basically let them kind of do whatever they wanted. Now, this idea talked about a lot in economics. It's called laissez faire. It's a French word, literally means hands off. And the government kind of gave these companies free rein to run their business however they please. So with very little restrictions and regulations, these businesses could do whatever they wanted to make money. Hell, at this time, if you wanted to sell poison and say it was a medicine, you could do it, right? If you wanted to hire kids to work in your factories and pay them pennies a day, you could do it. If you wanted to hire workers and run them, 14-hour shifts a day with very little breaks, you could do it, right? If the customer didn't like the product, if the employee didn't like the working conditions, according to the government, they were free to leave, right? You didn't have to buy the product. That's on you, right? You took the job. You bought this product. You take the risk. laissez faire, very little restrictions, and so these companies again were able to get even bigger than before, save a lot of money, make a lot of money with very little restrictions, hands off, very little laws. It was kind of the Wild West at the time when it came to business. Other way businesses grew was the rise of corporations. Now, you say you have a company, and of course talking about the stock market, you make money by selling shoes, of course, right? But it takes time, and you got to hire the workers and open the factory and actually sell the shoes before you make a profit. But with a corporation, you can actually sell pieces of your company to raise money, and you can make money before you even make a single shoe or open your doors for workers. That's kind of what a corporation is, right? You're selling the company, not the product. This is, like I said, the stock market, still big deal today, but that's basically how it works. And it was a big way for companies to get a lot of investors and get a lot of money to start a big business and kind of skip the baby steps and the growing pains of kind of starting from scratch and growing slow. So getting people to buy your company, of course, they buy the company, so if you make money, they share it with you. If you lose money as a business, they lose money too. But usually if the company does well and you make money, the investors are happy, everyone's doing well. And so it's another way to make profits at the time by selling shares of your company. Eventually these companies realize we can make even more money, noticing a theme here, if we team up basically and work together to make profits, right? Usually companies are opposed to one another, right? Usually you have a competitor. There's always another company out there who's trying to fight for that customer, right? Make a better product, make it cheaper, make it more useful, right? And that's the customer is going to buy what they like best. That's usually the way it works, but companies don't like competition because it forces, it takes away their profit. I could sell this shoe for, I don't know, $80, but because it's going to be expensive, I might have to lower the price to $60 to make it cheaper than my competitors. I just lost $20 when I could have made it, could have sold it for $80. So competition is good for customers, bad for businesses. But businesses realize if we team up, then we can kind of screw the customers and just make all of us make money at the same time. And that's what a trust is. It's companies teaming up. Instead of competition, they're on the same team. And what they would agree is, okay, say we're in the shoe industry, right? Well, instead of, me making a shoe for $80 and you selling a shoe for $60, let's just agree to sell it all for $85, right? So that way when people go shoe shopping, they're not going to have a lot of choice. Every shoe they buy is going to be the same price. And so, we're all going to sell shoes at this kind of inflated higher price and make the most money we can. And the customer is not going to have as much choice. So this was very popular at the time. And almost every industry you could think of ended up trusting up together, right? There was a railroad trust, a banking trust, a beef industry trust, a fabrics trust, a textiles trust, any industry conceivable that got big enough, these businesses quickly teamed up and formed trusts, right? Not partnerships so much, but just agreeing not to compete. We also see monopolies, where sometimes companies got so big they ended up not just teaming up with competitors, but buying their competitors out. So they were the only company in town selling this product. Today that's illegal. You cannot do that. But there were no rules at this time, and so that was kind of the goal of every company. Get so big you were the only company in town. And some of them actually did this, where they had total control of all products in that industry, all the prices, who gets to buy it, you make a lot of money when you're the only business in town selling oil, for example. We'll come back to try and stop this, because this is kind of a problem. Congress passes a few laws. The most famous one that's talked about in history classes is called the Sherman Antitrust Act. Famous basically because it sucked, right? Again, the government was hands off, and the Sherman Antitrust Act is a good way of showing just how kind of weak and ineffectual the government was. We remember this act because of again how weak it was. Basically, it made trust illegal, but the way the law was written, it doesn't really specify what a trust is and what a trust isn't. So the trusts weren't really affected. It also didn't really have any punishments for trusts. So even if you did, you really weren't going to get punished. So you might get like a slap on the wrist. But again, it did very little to stop the growth of trusts. And it's just, again, a way to remind us today of how the government did very little to try and stop these businesses when there was a problem. Famous little cartoon here. You can see kind of showing how people viewed the government at this time. This is the Congress, and you can see the senators and representatives are all just kind of goofing off, being lazy, it looks like, just milling around. But in the back of the room, you got these big money bag looking guys. These are the trusts, right? And there's no question who has the power. There's no question who's calling the shots right now. It's not the Congress that's in charge. It's these big money businesses telling them what to do. And that's how Americans viewed the government and the business and their relationships at this time. And they would not be wrong, because this is basically how the government kind of ran. Might still be the way today, but businesses were calling the shots. More things change, the more they stay the same, right? Last thing to finish off with is talking about businesses, but there are also some very powerful business leaders from this time. These certain men rose to become incredibly powerful, very, very prominent. And these guys kind of wrote the book on modern business and how to run a modern business and how to be extremely profitable, but by doing it by being ruthless and using every advantage you can and stamping out competition, right? And we still look at these guys today as kind of, people to look up to, and, we like to celebrate wealth and hard work, and these guys definitely did that. In that case, we call them captains of industry, right? Even this time, they were looked up as role models. They lived the American dream. They came from nothing, and through hard work and, again, that little bit of ruthlessness, they were able to amass huge fortunes. Who wouldn't want to be in that position? However, sometimes people look down on these guys as robber barons because they took advantage of everybody they could, right? They took advantage of workers. They took advantage of the government. They did everything they could to get rid of competition and not play fair. So there's maybe, some unfair play and some cheating going on, and that's not good, but, it's a mixed bag. And even today we look at business leaders and very wealthy people, and there's a lot of jealousy, but there's also a lot of anger, and that was the same case back then, during this time too. So there's entrepreneurs. There's two famous ones we remember that stand out. Andrew Carnegie, who helped build U.S. Steel, and a guy named John D. Rockefeller, who built Standard Oil. Now, they used concepts called horizontal and vertical integration, which is a whole video in itself, but basically different ways to grow your company. With horizontal integration, you are buying the steps to, businesses to make your product, right? So say you're in the steel business, you might be buying out coal mines and railroads and steel mills and, advertising agencies to help advertise your product. The steps to make your product, vertical integration. That's vertical integration. I always get them confused. Horizontal is when you're buying out competitors. So you're buying out companies that make a similar product, and then you gobble them up to become a monopoly, right? Companies still do this today quite a bit. Also at this time, you have an idea of social Darwinism, kind of an excuse / belief that these men follow, these entrepreneurs, businessmen, and leaders, to kind of justify and so they're able to sleep at night, to kind of explain or excuse how they're able to generate all this wealth. So Darwin came around at this time, and his theory of evolution became very popular. Basically, survival of the fittest, species that can adapt and evolve are successful and will grow, while those who can't or fall behind and might be weak will become extinct. And so people took these ideas, perverted them a little bit, and applied them to the economy. So people like Carnegie and Rockefeller are wealthy, not because they were ruthless. Well, they were, but, also because, maybe they were smarter, right? maybe they worked harder, maybe because they were maybe more deserving. And so they're wealthy and rich because they were just the best people to become wealthy and rich. But at the same time, people who were poor or in poverty, they kind of deserve that place, right? Because they weren't able to compete. They weren't able to adapt. They weren't intelligent enough, or they didn't work hard enough. They had the same opportunities. They just couldn't rise to the level of these guys. And so they also kind of deserved their spot and their place in society. They just weren't able to compete in the economy as well as other people. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. That's just the beliefs that people had at the time. So real quick, just to finish up, like I said, looking at these two gentlemen, because they're in all your history textbooks and very, very popular and well remembered today. Just real quickly, Andrew Carnegie, that's a picture of him right there, was the son of Scottish immigrants. And as a young boy, he kind of had to work to support his family. Young Andrew Carnegie started working in the railroads, which is a very big, booming, growing business in the United States at this time, and very quickly kind of worked his way up the ladder, right? Andy was a quick learner. He was able to accomplish any task. He was ambitious, and so he quickly rose into the railroad companies and made a lot of money with them, and then eventually decided he wanted to go and get into another new industry, the steel industry. And so he was very important in kind of mainstreaming the Bessemer process, growing his steel mills, buying out competitors, getting all the steps involved to make his steel, and became, again, very rich, very wealthy, very powerful, because it was his steel, basically, that the United States was built on, right? All the skyscrapers and buildings at the time were built with Carnegie steel, right? Railroad tracks, the bridges, the battleships that the Navy was building, all built with steel that came from his factories. So you can imagine he became very, very wealthy with just how much the country was growing at this time, and that was Carnegie. He also believed, interestingly enough, that it was the responsibility of wealthy people basically to die poor. That, he amassed a great fortune, and instead of keeping it, he should try and kind of give it back. So he was very philanthropical. What that means is he spent his money not giving it away for handouts, but he believed he wanted to give people the tools and opportunities to better themselves. So he was all about building things like libraries where people could go and read and get education. Carnegie Hall in New York was this big place for like plays and operas and musicals. It was a place for people to go and relax, and he funded that. So he tried to give his money back because he thought that was his responsibility. He kind of owed a debt to society. And so by spending his money, he could try and help people, give them opportunities maybe he didn't quite have. A little different from John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller was at the same time, but in a different industry. He got involved in the oil business, right? Extremely ruthless Rockefeller. Rockefeller was probably the person who perfected the idea of monopoly. And he was able to, by some ruthless business practices, gobble up and buy basically all the other oil companies around him. And he created a business called Standard Oil. It eventually got to the point he basically did own all the oil refineries. He owned all the oil businesses in the country. And Standard Oil was the only oil you could buy for your car, for your engines, for factory, stuff like that. People used it to light their homes, lighting oil, even back at the time before electricity came around and light bulbs. However, the company got too big. Monopolies are illegal, and the government finally would crack down and go after Rockefeller and break his company up. And they were successful. So Standard Oil doesn't really exist today. However, all of the big oil companies that you may see around your city all at one time used to belong to Standard Oil. So like your Shell gasoline, your Texaco, right? Those were all part of Standard Oil, but the government ended up breaking them up into pieces like the 1900s because they went after Rockefeller, again, and his big company. Interesting fact about Rockefeller, just to close it off, until recently, he was, I believe, the richest man ever to live. He got so wealthy by cornering the oil market. For a very long time, he was the richest. No one ever had more money than Rockefeller, except for maybe a few African kings. But guy was incredibly wealthy. He was recently overtaken in the last few years by a guy named Jeff Bezos. If that sounds familiar, he's the guy who owns Amazon, which may be on its way to becoming a monopoly soon. But yeah, Rockefeller became very rich, very wealthy by growing his oil company, Standard Oil. All right, so that's it for the Industrial Revolution. As you can see, a lot of these topics are still very relevant today, still going on today. Again, it very much is the beginning of the modern United States, and so that's why it's an important thing to learn. And I hope this video helped you and tried to super simplify some of these concepts to make them a little easier to understand and help you in your classes. All right, that's it for today. That's Mr. Duker, and thanks for watching. I will catch you later. Adios.